Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is an interview special and one I'm very excited about. I'm joined today by the Liverpool University academic and host of the Price of Football podcast, Kieran Maguire. Fantastic surname, by the way. I have to reiterate that. We're here to discuss how PSR works and how it affects Aston Villa this summer. Kieran, welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Now, I'm going to start with a very simple question and one that a lot of people will know the answer to, but to be fair, a lot might not. What actually is PSR and why was it introduced into football?
Okay, if we answer that second question first, there was a feeling around about 15, 16 years ago, we'd had Roman Abramovich acquire Chelsea Football Club, and all of a sudden, the level of expenditure at that club went through a stratospheric level. It accelerated far ahead of the rest of the Premier League. We then saw Sheikh Mansour acquire Manchester City. We had Qatar acquiring PSG. And all of a sudden, the the relatively cozy relationship that football had. Now, you're probably too young to remember this, but I remember when the Premier League kicked off. Manchester United used to win it 2 years out of three, and Arsenal used to win it the other year, and that was it. So it wasn't heading towards what we have in Scotland, but it wasn't that far away from it. There weren't any sort of serious challenges. Then Chelsea arrived, and we had a new kid on the block chasing trophies. Then Manchester City, and we had four. And the senior clubs, not just domestically, but also in Europe, feared what can only be described as disruptors, very wealthy disruptors, but disruptors all the same. And they felt that the ability of these clubs who'd historically had far less money than them, who could now match, if not outspend them, as far as the transfer market was concerned, was a threat to their position at the top table. So we started to see people like Arsene Wenger and Michel Platini bring into popular discussions the concept of financial doping, that effectively your ability to buy success. Football's always been about buying success. Think about Blackburn Rovers. They didn't do it, out of all of a sudden, Lancashire became a very attractive place to be. It was because Jack Walker put money into the club. And if you take a look at other historic investment into football clubs, football's a talent game. Talent follows the money. If you've got the best talent, you've got a greater chance of winning trophies. It's actually a very simple relationship. So the feel was, what happens if we have another 2, 3, or 4 Manchester Cities in the Premier League? Because Manchester United and Arsenal, they were used to qualifying for the Champions League every single year. It was a given. And now that there was a genuine chance of that not happening, across in Spain, the fear was Real Madrid and Barcelona, 2 fantastically successful clubs, also successful not just domestically but in Europe. Well, could these disruptor clubs potentially start to compete for the trophies that were seen not as a birthright, but something you would expect on a very regular basis at those clubs? So therefore, financial controls were introduced. Initially, they were called financial fair play, but you have to ask, fair to whom? Initially, the justification for these rules was that there was too much debt in football. But then people pointed out, hold on, Manchester City's not got any debt whatsoever because they're controlled by a company in the UAE, and the concept of debt in Islamic finance is a non-starter. So people go, we need to come up with something or other. So that's sort of a broad potted history of the introduction of cost controls into the game. There was a feeling that these disruptor clubs were setting new benchmarks in terms of levels of wages, level of monies being spent on transfer fees. And that is the case. We've seen wages accelerate ahead of revenue in the Premier League. So we've therefore been through a few iterations of rules to what we now have, what is referred to as still financial fair play, in UEFA, but they're replacing that with a sort of wage cap. And in the Premier League, we have what is referred to as profitability and sustainability rules, which is exactly the same as the old financial fair play rules. It's just, Tip-Xing out the old title and replacing it with something equally grandiose, pompous, and inaccurate, because the rules encourage neither profitability or sustainability. So that's our history lesson. What do we therefore have? We have a set of rules which says over a rolling 3-year period, you can lose, if you're in the Premier League for each of those 3 years, you can lose £105 million over that period. But that is not the same as the accounting figures. You start off with the accounting figures, and then we make adjustments for what perhaps could be described as virtue spending. So if you spend money on infrastructure, you build a new stadium, you can say, well, we want to have better facilities for fans. We want to have better facilities for players as well, because better facilities means a better quality product, more enjoyable product. You can also sell it at more expensive ticket prices, but we'll deal with that later. So if you spend money on infrastructure, that's excluded. So over the course of 3 years, for example, Spurs will have a rolling around about 210 million pounds spent on infrastructure, and therefore that comes off their accounting losses. If you spend money on your academy, then your academy costs, what are we talking about? Well, the way that it's sold, we want to encourage young people into the game, and therefore to give them opportunities. That's absolutely great. Doesn't deal with the fact that there's a 99.8% failure rate as far as academies are concerned. So but let's park that particular. So money invested in academies. If you've got a community scheme, the work that Aston Villa do in the community is absolutely sensational. It makes such a difference, because I'm a university academic. If I try to be a good guy and go into one of the local schools and say to a bunch of 14-year-olds, work very hard at school and go to university and you can have a great future, they go away, granddad. You're part of the establishment. Yeah. And it's the same if I do that as a social worker, and I'm saying that to do that as a police officer. And for those kids who are starting to become detached from education, truancy rates, they join up with others who are sort of disaffected young people. That is an ongoing social issue. If I go into that same classroom and I'm wearing a Villa badge or a Blues badge, or where I work at a Liverpool or an Everton or a Tranmere badge, because I'm a coach or I'm part of the community scheme, and the first question I ask is, I'm from Villa. How many Villa fans have we got in here? Can you see that instantly you've engaged with a young person? And then you can develop courses, and then you can hopefully help that person to become more engaged with society, to make a greater contribution, ideally to have a better lifestyle for themselves and those around them, and so on. So those schemes run by football clubs, especially in the Premier League, is something I don't think gets enough credit. But the great thing is, if you spend money on that, it's exempt from FFP. And most of that money tends to come centrally from the Premier League as well. If you've got a women's team, all of the women's team in the WSL are losing money.
Yeah.
But there's a case for saying in 5 years, 10 years time, we've seen Arsenal getting crowds of 30, 40, 50, now practically 60,000. Yeah. Well, can we be doing that at Villa Park? Can we be doing that at St Andrews? Can we be doing that at Liverpool? And so on. So if you run a women's team and it's losing money, those losses are ignored. So you make these types of adjustments, and then you get an overall number. And provided that is less than £105 million over 3 years, happy days, fill your boots. If it's more, we've got an issue. You get called in by the Premier League, go on the naughty step. We've seen what's happened at Everton and Forest.
Yeah.
Potentially what's happening at Manchester City. Leicester City could be an interesting observation over the course of the summer. We don't know the exact numbers, but things don't look great. If the noise is, I'm fortunate enough to do an awful lot of dealings with people in the media, with people in football itself, and you go, we're a bit twitchy. So,
Yeah.
so that is the rule. You can lose 105 million pounds, but it's not a simple 105 million pounds. There's lots of muck and nettles,
Right.
and that's absolutely great if you're a sports lawyer, because muck and nettles is what they're looking for, and that's why the Premier League last season spent 30 million pounds on legal fees.
Yeah. It's a pretty intense amount of money, particularly with what they're dealing with primarily, I guess, in Man City, but also with Everton and Forest last season. But PSR has been criticised by a lot of people, by fans, for instance. And this week, Aston Villa chairman Nassef Sawiris wrote an article or contributed to an article about criticising PSR as well and saying it was kind of affecting the chances of a team like Aston Villa who are upwardly mobile at this moment in time to really compete with the so-called Big Six. What are those criticisms and how justified are they?
Well, profits or loss, it's the difference between revenue, which is the money that you make from ticket sales, the broadcasting deals, the front of shirt sponsorship deals, plus your player profits. Effectively, we'll lob those in as well. Plus, in the case of at least one club in somewhere in London, habit of selling off properties to itself. But we'll come back to that later. Less the cost of running the club. So if you are already in the UEFA Champions League, potentially you could be earning, again, next season with the expanded, you could be earning an extra 150 to 200 million pounds compared to a club that's not qualified for Europe. And therefore, that's effectively another 150 to 200 million pounds that you can put into your player budget, wages, transfer fees, and so on. Nobody's denying that the likes of Manchester United and Liverpool and some of the bigger London clubs are fantastic global brands, and they've got huge support, and they make an absolute fortune from their front of shirt sponsorship deals. They've got official cheese partners, they've got official tractor tire partners, they've got official this, that, and the other partners all around the world. And again, every extra £1 million that comes in from those deals is an extra £1 million advantage that they have over the rest of the Premier League. So the concern and the criticism is that it creates a closed shop. If you in 2022, 2023 have a 200 or 300 million pound advantage, and if we take a look at the accounts of Aston Villa, Aston Villa were making just under 200 million pounds a year in revenue. Manchester City 700 million. So Manchester City have got a 500 million pound advantage in terms of the money coming in, which means that Manchester City can spend an extra 500 million pounds on wages and transfer fees. Unai Emery, fantastic manager. Can he turn around a 500 million pound advantage that somebody else has over Villa? Because if he can, the chances are he'll get nicked by another club. And I know he's just signed a new contract, and I know it's that's football, and we all know what football is. Barcelona or Real Madrid or Bayern Munich or one of the big clubs elsewhere, they will come in and say, fantastic job you're doing at Villa. We've seen what you've done. Tell you what, you're doing it on a tight budget. What could you do it without ours? So that is the criticism, that for an ambitious club, for a club that wants to move itself up the elevator as far as the Premier League is concerned. And I think, let's be honest, as far as the Premier League is concerned, I think we're looking at Aston Villa and Newcastle at present.
Yeah.
Those clubs have owners who are in a position where they could put additional money in the club. They could say, well, if we want to go and boost the wage bill by 100, 150 million pounds a year, and we put that money into the club and we ring fence that money, and even we say, right, we're going to ring fence that money for the next 2 or 3 years, and we evidence that to the Premier League, you're not allowed to do so. And I saw Villa win the old First Division. I saw Villa win the European Cup, and that was done on merit. It wasn't done on the fact that there was so much financial differences in the game 30 or 40 years ago. And I'm showing my age here as a legacy fan, that realistically, at the start of each season, there's a maximum of 3 or 4 clubs that can win the Premier League. Is that good for football? Is that fair? So the argument put forward by the critics is that the rules as they stand are protectionist. They look after the interests of the larger clubs. They don't look after the interests of all of the clubs in the Premier League. And as such, there's a case for saying that they are anti-competitive, and that's what we're seeing. We're recording this on the 14th of June. This is week one of Manchester City taking the Premier League to an arbitration hearing as to whether or not some of the other rules which have been introduced are appropriate and proper. And I think this is what Naz has said in his interview.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think on the one case it is effectively looks protectionist, but on the other hand as well is that I guess when Newcastle had their takeover, with their owners and the links to Saudi Arabia, there's every chance that Newcastle could have come in and then seen Aston Villa as a potential rival and gone, we're going to bid 120 million for Douglas Luiz and pay him 200 grand a week, and then we're going to get Boubacar Kamara and do the same and pay him 400 grand a week, and suddenly it just goes completely wild and out of control. Is that sort of the counterpoint then, and why essentially it's probably why I support PSR existing, but I do think it needs evolution as it goes along as well.
Yeah, I think that the fear of one or two clubs hoarding the best players in the world is a legitimate one. At the same time, I work for the Professional Footballers Association, so I teach professional footballers and retired footballers, and listening to them, what they want to do is that they want to play football. They don't want to be in a squad. They want to be in a team. So yes, you could put together the 20 best players in the world, but if you've got half a dozen of them thinking, oh yeah, I'm one of the 20 best players in the world, and I'm getting 10 minutes if I'm lucky, or in fact I'm not even making the bench, they're actually probably going to say to themselves, it's not worth it. Because if all that they were interested in money, they'd all be in the Saudi Pro League now. Yeah, let's be honest. Yeah, because the Saudi Pro League has the opportunity to offer that to players. And you look at the players who have gone across. Okay, Cristiano Ronaldo has I guess been a success, but he's a bit strange. Neymar doesn't appear to be overly enjoying himself. Jordan Henderson, he was playing in front of 600-700 paid people a week, and then going, I'm a professional footballer. He went to Ajax within. So the grass isn't always greener. It is a short career. I would never criticize a player for going there, and either from a financial or you can move into the moral and ethical issues, but that's a separate discussion to be had. Because 8 years ago, the Chinese Super League was offering exactly the same conditions. How many of the best players in the world went there? Chelsea managed to shift a few and so on, but there wasn't the rush, and we're not seeing the rush which is being spoken about, I think, in certain spheres. So could a club hoard the best players in the Premier League? Yes, it could. There's no doubt about that. So therefore, is there a case for saying we don't have just the existing elite, the ambitious clubs, the Newcastle and Villa? What happens if you're Bournemouth or Brighton or Palace or Brentford and so on, Wolves, Leicester, clubs who have still got owners that we'd all like to swap bank accounts with. I'm not denying that. But at the same time, they are only multi-millionaires or billionaires as opposed to multi-billionaires and sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess focusing on Aston Villa at the moment, obviously this summer already we've seen it's not confirmed as of recording, but it looks like Douglas Luiz is going to go to Juventus. So what's your understanding of where Villa are with regards to PSR right now?
Right. If we take a look at Aston Villa's accounts for the last 3 seasons, in 21-22, they were absolutely fine because they had a Jack Grealish shaped profit. And a footballer's profit is the difference between the sale price and what we refer to as the book value of the player. Now, how much did it cost Villa to sign Jack Grealish? It was nothing. So therefore, they sold him to City for £1 million, for £100 million. That's £100 million pure profit. And remember, that counts as far as Villa's finances are concerned for 3 seasons. So for 21-22, for 22-23, for 23-24, that has really helped Villa's calculations as far as PSR are concerned. That drops out of the equation effectively on the 30th of June 2024. So next season, things are looking not as rosy. I mean, Villa lost £120 million in 22-23. They were paying £89 in wages for every £100 that came through the door. If you add in their effective transfer costs, they were paying out £132 in player costs, wages plus what we call transfer fee amortization, which is the way that PSR is calculated. So if you're spending £132 for every £100 that come in the door, before you stick on the floodlights, before you get the players in the coaches to go to an away fixture, before the groundsman puts petrol in the mower, you've already got a problem. How is that loss dealt with? It's because Wes Edens and Naz Sawiris say, we're billionaires, we'll cover those losses. But that's an issue from a PSR point of view. So 22-23 was a tough year for Villa. They've done fantastically well this season. Huge credit to them, especially given that they're playing in Europe to qualify for the Champions League. It's a hell of an achievement. So Villa will have a bit more prize money this season compared to last season from the Premier League, because the way that it works is the side that finishes bottom of the Premier League gets £3.5 million for finishing 20th. And then if you go to 19th, you get 2 times £3.4 million. You go all up the way to 4. So Aston Villa will get what 16, 17 times that. So that will have helped them. But you don't make money in the Europa Conference. The prize money is actually quite low. You've got the added complication of you need a bigger and a better squad, because as you know yourself from seeing them play, you've got to have a squad that can cope with Sunday, Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday, Thursday. So they've had to invest more in players, which has offset the additional money coming in. I think it will have been a tough year as far as Villa is concerned. And that's why I think it was that Villa put a proposal at the Premier League owners meeting, was it last week, for this £105 million to be increased to £135 million. On the justification is that £105 million was set in 2013 and it should have been index linked. I did some research work and saying, well, based on what we've seen in terms of the money coming into football, if we use that as what we might call football inflation, because football clubs aren't buying pints of milk and a tin of beans, the general inflation is independent of that. In my calculations, that limit should have been increased to around about £213 million. So a substantial increase. But there hasn't been an appetite for that. So I think Villa's proposals was put to the Premier League chief executives last week, and it didn't get a lot of support for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I was quite surprised by that. I did think other clubs would jump at that, but I'd love to know the actual reasonings as to why. But Douglas Luiz, major player for Villa, it looks like he's going to Juventus. Now, what's been reported is that Aston Villa are going to get about €20 million in cash. And on top of that, 2 players are going to come from Juventus to Villa, Weston McKennie and Samuel Iling-Junior. And let's say both of them are worth €20 million each. Does that mean Aston Villa have made £60 million on paper? Or have we bought those players and therefore only made 20 million on paper? Like how? Because obviously Douglas Luiz has been with Villa for 5 years, so his transfer fee of I think it was £15 million has been paid off over the course of that 5 years. So have Villa made 60 million, or am I completely misunderstanding it?
Yes, I mean the way that you calculate your profit when a player leaves, it is the sale proceeds less the book value. So if they bought him for 15 million 5 years ago, yes, he signed a new contract, but his book value is probably going to be 2-3 million at best. So there is the scope here to put some interesting values on, and this can benefit both Juventus and Aston Villa. And we've seen Juventus do this before. They did a swap with Barcelona. They swapped Arthur from Barcelona, who was valued at 80 million euros, and people going, he's a decent player, blimey, well there.
Yeah.
And then they sold Pjanic from Juventus to Barcelona at the same time. And people say, yeah, Pjanic, yeah, he's got 29, 30, it's like you're playing for Juventus. You know, Mug. He's going to get in your five-side team on a Thursday night. I'm not denying that whatsoever.
Yeah,
but he went for around about 60 million. So and people went, that doesn't pass the smell test. So I think this is one of the raised eyebrow issues that is taking place with regards to the Luiz potential sale. Could it be that both clubs have put a valuation on the player? Yeah, because normally the way that a transfer works is that if you do not have a specific release clause in your contract, buying club says, I'd like to sign Luiz. I'll offer you 40 million, and Villa's saying, well, we think he's worth 47. And then you do a bit of haggling, and you agree on perhaps 45. When it comes to swap deals, it's not worth either club haggling, because you can both report these big profits. And if you do have a PSR elephant in the room, it's a way of circumventing that. And the problem with PSR, from my point of view, and I'm not bigging myself up here or anybody else, is that when the rules came out, I used to teach creative accounting on Wall Street, which was not a career to be recommended. And that sort of dried up in 2007, 2008. Can't understand why. Understand why. Right. But when the rules came out, I took a look at those rules and I said, well, if I did that, and if I did that, and if I did that, I can circumvent those rules. Yeah, and I'm a teacher. So if you've got the best minds in law and finance looking at the rules, they're going to be going, well, we can do this, that, and the other, and we can find ways. And unfortunately, that's what we've ended up with now, is sports lawyers and sports accountants have become as important to clubs as players.
Wow.
And that ain't right.
No. I've said this myself that this week it's kind of weird signing a player and having to think about amortization. Whereas before all I used to think about was how many goals he might score. I guess with Villa, it looks like we're selling Luiz, and also John Duran looks like there's a very strong chance he might go to Chelsea, and some of the figures going around are 35 to 40 million. With where Villa are financially at the moment, with your understanding of it, would that mean that if Villa make a few big sales before June 30th, from July 1st, will Villa this summer have a decent amount of money to spend for the squad, or are we going to have to box very clever these few months?
I think if they make a couple of big sales of players who have little accounting value left in them, and for people not familiar with amortization, if I sign a player for £15 million on a 5-year contract, what we do is say, well, 15 divided by 5 is 3. So therefore there's a PSR cost each year of 3 million. Boom, boom, boom. And each year the value of the player for PSR purposes decreases. It goes from 15 to 12 to 9 to 6 to 3 to 0. So Douglas Luiz being effectively towards the end of the contract, he's got relatively little value. So there's plenty of profit. So yeah, a couple of decent sales for Villa, and that means that going forwards, they can certainly sign players. They're going to be make sure that they're the right players, do your due diligence and so on, and it does give them more flexibility as far as the transfer market is concerned. And remember, when you hear, we just signed a player for £40 million, but we sign him on a 5-year contract, the cost of Villa is only £8 million plus his wages, and if you're signing a player for £40 million, let's face it, he ain't coming for 200 quid a week.
But so Aston Villa are now in the Champions League as well. Are there different rules that Aston Villa are going to have to comply by now from UEFA because we're now in the Champions League? And in a way, does that put us at any kind of disadvantage against clubs like a Newcastle say, who aren't in Europe this season.
Yes, yeah, I think you raise a very valid point. Um, UEFA have brought in new sets of rules. So under UEFA rules, you're only allowed to lose 60 million euro as opposed to 105 million pounds. So a few years ago, Wolverhampton Wanderers, they qualified for Europe and they satisfied the Premier League rules, but they were in breach of UEFA rules. So they were given a squad cap, they were given a wage cap restraint as far as UEFA was concerned. Could UEFA's analysis be more constraining than that? Yes, we have seen some clubs being banned from European competition. No evidence of that with respect to Villa. And the other thing what we're seeing in terms of UEFA's competition is a squad control cap. And the way that works is you look at the money coming into the club, which is, as we said earlier, ticket sales, broadcast, commercial, and your player sale profits. And they effectively pick the best of 1, 2, or 3 years in terms of the average of any of those. So you put that into the pot, and then you're allowed to spend a percentage of that on players. So this calendar year, Villa will be allowed to spend 80% of the money coming in on wages. So I think that's likely to be a more onerous task for Villa than actually the Premier League rules itself.
Wow. So, and also something I know as well about the Premier League rules is that I believe they're going to be changing in the next couple of years and the terminology is anchoring. You okay to explain that one to her?
Yeah. I think there's going to be two changes to the Premier League rules. First of all, they're going to follow the UEFA rules because it seems daft not to. There's enough paperwork to have to deal with already than two sets of rules. So they're going to do that. And what they're going to say is the long-term aim of UEFA is to have a 70% squad cost control cap, and that will be the position from 2025 onwards. The Premier League is going to do that for those clubs that have qualified for UEFA competition. For those clubs that have not qualified, you'll be able to spend up to 85% of your revenues on player wages, amortization, agents fees, because agents are the pantomime dames of football. So therefore they're an easy target and so on. But there's also, as far as this season is concerned, they are introducing a shadow anchor. I should be very careful how you say that. And the way that works is it's very bizarre. You take the TV money generated by the club finishing bottom of the Premier League. So the most recent figures we have are for season 22-23. Southampton received £103 million in TV money. And then you multiply that by a number, and it looks like that number is going to be 5. So 103 times 5 gives me a figure of £515 million. And you say, right, that is the cap. That is the maximum amount of money that you can spend, again, on player wages, amortization, agents fees, blah, blah, blah. And if that was going to be applied both in the Premier League and by UEFA, it would be, in my view, it would be fantastic news for those clubs such as Villa, who are ambitious, who are wanting to push themselves up, if the owners want to put that money in, because it would mean that they would be able to spend the same amount of money as Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester City, PSG, and so on.
Okay.
But those rules are working along with the UEFA rules rather than so they're complementary rather than a substitute. So it's a very, very strange thing to be happening. It's being driven, my understanding is by is it Tim Lewis at Arsenal and Steve Parish at Villa are the architects of this. They seem to be the ones who are most enthusiastic because they fear that by just focusing on broadcasting, it stops these bigger clubs getting even further ahead. Because if Manchester City generate an extra £50 million from a new sponsorship deal in the Middle East, that doesn't get taken into consideration because it's all based on broadcast income.
Right. So ultimately, long term, you think anchoring could be beneficial to an Aston Villa or to even like Brentford's and Brighton's, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, if their owners want to spend that amount of money, and there's no evidence that they do, yeah, I think that we've got clubs who say we can't spend bigger, we have to spend smarter. But it's a bit like having if you've got a £15,000 credit card limit, doesn't mean you need to spend 15,000. Yeah, you might be happy just spending a couple of grand on it or spending nothing at all. Yeah, ultimately it's your choice, but at least you have the same limit as far as every club is concerned. And then it comes down to the culture, the strategy, the individuals in the club. Should football clubs be rich people's playthings? Because that's what they are now.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, I remember Doug Ellis. I remember Jack Walker. I remember Martin Edwards or the Edwards family at Manchester United, and Francis Lee and his sales of toilet rolls funding Manchester City and so on.
I remember. Yeah. Yeah. It's always nice to hear Deadly Doug Ellis get a mention. Certainly, I think Aston Villa are probably one of the more interesting teams to watch with regards to all this in the next couple of years. And but yeah, I'm excited to see kind of the developments on both sides, and commercial and on the football pitch as well with Villa. But Kieran, it's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you. If this interview is famous enough, instead of Frost Nixon, we'll have Maguire as the as the future. But yeah, Kieran, for those who don't know, where can we find you and your great podcast online?
I occupy Twitter for far too much of my life. So I can be found at Kieran Maguire. Somehow I've managed to schlep 120,000 followers or something daft like that from talking nerdy numbers. And I also co-host a podcast called The Price of Football with comedy writer and Crystal Palace fan, Kevin Day. Kevin's an absolute diamond to work with. He's a very funny guy. He's a very generous guy. He makes me look 10 times better than I am, and I bask in all the glory.
Well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Kieran. I really appreciate you coming on, and it was fascinating to chat to you.
Thank you.